And joining me now in studio is Jeremy Saltan, political advisor of the Yamina Party and director of its English operations, and our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. And Owen, the votes actually have gone in favor of the coalition. It's a series of votes for this first reading. So far, so good. But the debate and discussion is continuing there in Parliament. Bring us up to date.
That's right, Caleb. As you mentioned, the budget passing on its first reading, as well as the related arrangements law, as it's known in Israeli parliamentary parlance. This does not mean the budget is finally passed. As you mentioned, it still has to go through the committees and through the parliament, get its second and third reading, and all of that has to happen by early November. And that's why this is important to people sitting outside Israel. Obviously, Israelis are very concerned about this budget. It has a real effect on our lives. Everything from agricultural policy to the retirement age of women to this new regulatory body. Those are the three main points that were at issue that had been resolved for the budget to pass its first reading. But for those of you outside the country, the reason this is important is that if the coalition doesn't pass it by early November, it falls and Israel goes back to elections. And that's why, Kalev, this has been playing out not only here in Israel, but on the international stage, reportedly guiding Biden administration policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Biden administration not wanting to put pressure on this government, reportedly, because it doesn't want to hurt the government before that budget deadline. The conventional wisdom here in Israel is that this budget is going to pass. It's gotten past its biggest obstacles. Nobody wants elections and so forth. But don't forget how famously narrow this coalition's majority is. Just 61 out of 120 seats. It only takes one or two holdouts who have a narrow self-interest to bring this whole house down. And so again, I think we have to be wary, as strong as that conventional wisdom is, that there could be wrinkles at the end. And there could be something that changes the way that this is going.
Right, and just to illustrate how crucial this vote was today in Parliament, we have those pictures of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, now opposition leader, sitting in the Knesset behind a plexiglass screen up in the galleries of the Knesset. That is because he just came back from the United States and is still in his 1 week mandatory quarantine, coronavirus quarantine. But somehow he still managed to get there in the Knesset and be in the galleries. We've actually never seen a picture like that before. But
sign of the times. I mean, it's become old news for members of Parliament Club to come and vote while they're in quarantine. But it's something new to have that podium brought up there and have Netanyahu speak from behind the glass.
Before.
I guess we're living with the virus.
Right, we've never seen that before. Now, Jeremy, you were there when everybody was doubting that this government, this coalition would ever be formed. You were there saying it was going to happen, you're going to see. And then when it was formed, people said this budget vote, this is going to be its main obstacle. This is going to be where it's probably going to collapse. What do you see now?
What I see is just time after time of these arbitrary dates that people tell us, oh, this is the test of the coalition, and we just break through each one of them, and we just keep rolling along. Yeah, there was first the cabinet vote when it came to the state budget. Everyone said, how are you going to be able, with a coalition with such broad interests in parties, be able to have all of the leaders of these parties, of, you know, from Meretz all the way to Gideon Sa'ar and Bennett, agree on these issues? We passed that. Then they said, oh, there's going to be this issue with the Delta variant, with COVID. You guys are not going to be able to get through this. You're not doing a lockdown. It's going to be a disaster. We saw that we were able to go ahead and get a control of the numbers and really put us back on track without having a collapse of our economy. Pretty good thing. Then they said, well, you're not going to be able to start school. That's going to be terrible. All the parents are going to hate you. Yesterday, we started school. Today, we presented the budget for the Knesset. We'll pass it in the first reading. It'll go to the Appropriations Committee. We'll pass it there. There'll be a few, you know, I don't know what you want to call them, a few people looking for attention who are going to want everyone in the nation to know their name. So they'll say, we're holding out for this or that. Look, in the end, everyone's going to fall in line. There is no alternative other than, yeah, going to another election. There is no person in the current government within the 61 MKs of this coalition who wants to say that they're going to an election, the entire country, because of them. In the end, we'll come to whatever agreements we need to within the Knesset. This happens every budget season, whether we have 61 or 91 MKs in the coalition, and we'll get it passed, and we'll roll through this date in November 3rd, just like we rolled past all the other ones.
Right, but Jeremy, this budget is also, it's not just a budget, it's really also a vote of confidence in the government by its members. And we don't know what may happen. It's an eternity in Israeli politics until November 4th. Other issues beyond the budget may arise on the Palestinian issue, on who knows what. And it just takes one person. We've seen members of your party, your own Yamina party of the Prime Minister, revolt and turn against the coalition in votes. How do we know that's certainly not possible that could happen here?
As I said, I expect there are going to be a few backbencher MKs that at this point no one knows what their names are besides perhaps the three of us. Will all get a chance to know what their name is, what is the key issue they care about. In the end, they will fall in line. None of these backbenchers want their name to be remembered with eternity as the reason that we went to a fifth election within such a short time period. There is no issue, whatever that you can think of right now, that any of these backbenchers can suddenly decide is worth going to an election over. I could understand if the leader of a party would make such a decision on some of the major issues, as you mentioned, when it comes to national security or diplomacy. But that has nothing to do with the budget, timeline, or any of these backbencher MKs. And then they're going to fall in line. They have no alternative.
Right. You go ahead, Al.
Yeah, quick 2 points. Number one, Jeremy just eloquently made the argument for the conventional wisdom. That's the argument you hear in Israel. We just heard it.
Or at
on
least
the other hand,
the wisdom of the coalition, let's say.
Right, but also in the media, this is essentially the argument that you hear. So it doesn't only reflect partisans, like Jeremy. It's not a term of criticism. It's a respectful position, but also of the commentariat here. But again, Kalev, the margins are so narrow, and it only takes one or two. One final note. Whatever it is that might ultimately bring down this coalition, I mean, we all die eventually. The reality, and I've said this before on our air, this coalition achieved its goal the moment it was sworn in, because the moment it was sworn in, Naftali Bennett, or if it stays alive long enough, Yair Lapid is prime minister, and Benjamin Netanyahu is not prime minister until further notice. And in order to become prime minister, he needs to win an election and then form a government. And if we've learned nothing else over the past few years, that's not all that easy for him to do.
Right. I do want to remind both you gentlemen that the previous government fell over the budget vote. And right up until the very end, a lot of people were saying that wasn't going to happen because Benny Gantz wasn't going to risk going to an election in which he would be wiped out, which polls at the time showed. And yet at the last minute, it seemed he turned that way. And the Netanyahu government fell.
Well, I was in the opposition at the time, but I did predict that that was very possible because in that case, Benny Gantz had no control over the members of his party.
Okay.
This is a different situation. Okay. The Norwegian law, the ministers who do not have a vote on the budget. I think it's a different
We'll see if your record remains unblemished, Jeremy. We'll know. It'll probably go right down to the wire on November 4th. Jeremy Saltan, Owen Alterman, thank you for that.